The Englishman rose slowly to his feet. He was terribly haggard. His nose seemed a mile long. He was not tall, and yet somehow his great hairless skull made him seem imposing. "You're much too kind, Leon," he said, looking at Leon and then casting his eyes down modestly. "As you may know, anyone who entertains the notion of the Nobel Prize is advised to act as if he is oblivious of its very existence. And in any case, I'm far too old to worry about it, and so I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." Light, puzzled laughter. "But one can scarcely help being aware of the marvelous friendship and hospitality of you and Inez, and thank goodness I don't have to pretend for a moment to be otherwise." The Lightities had now trebled so rapidly the company was baffled, but they murmured their encouragement. "So much so," he went on, "that I, for one, should be happy to sing for my supper." "I should think so," whispered Mrs. Rothroyd. "But I don't see how anyone would dare to do so after Mr. Chaflet's remarkable allusion to Canio's grief in Pagliacci." As only the English can do it, he pronounced Mr. Chaflet very archly, to bring out the ludicrous aspect of giving the dignified title Mr. to this rustic clown. Suddenly he stopped and lifted his head, and gazed straight ahead, as if looking through the walls of the building and out upon the metropolis beyond. He laughed dryly. "Forgive me. All at once I was hearing the sound of my own voice, and it occurred to me that I now have the sort of British voice which, had I heard it half a century ago when I was a young man, a delightfully hot-headed young man as I recall, would have caused me to leave the room." People cut glances at one another. "But I know you won't leave," Buffing continued. "It has always been wonderful to be an Englishman in the United States. Lord Gut may disagree with me." He pronounced gut with such a guttural bark, it was as if he were saying Lord Shithead. "But I doubt that he will. When I first came to the United States as a young man, before the Second Great War, and people heard my voice, they would say, 'Oh, you're English,' and I always got my way because they were so impressed. Nowadays, when I come to the United States and people hear my voice, they say, 'Oh, you're English, you poor thing.' And I still get my way, because your countrymen never fail to take pity on us." Much appreciative laughter and relief. The old man was mining the lighter vein. He paused again, as if trying to decide whether he should go on or not. His conclusion, evidently, was yes. "Why I've never written a poem about the States, I really don't know. Well, I take that back. I do know, of course. I have lived in a century in which poets are not supposed to write poems about anything, at least not anything you can put a geographical name to. But the United States deserve an epic poem. At various times in my career I considered writing an epic, but I didn't do that either. Poets are also not supposed to write epics any longer, despite the fact that the only poets who have endured and will endure are poets who have written epics. Homer, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, Milton, Spencer. Where will Mr. Eliot or Mr. Rimbaud, pronounced like Mr. Chaflet, be in their light even 25 years from now? In the shadows, I'm afraid, in the footnotes, deep in the Ibid thickets, along with Aubrey Buffing and a lot of other poets I have thought very highly of from time to time. No, we poets no longer even have the vitality to write epics. We don't even have the courage to make rhymes, and the American epic should have rhymes. Rhyme on top of rhyme in a shameless cascade, rhymes of the sort that Edgar Allan Poe gave us. Yes, Poe, who lived his last years just north of here, I believe, in a part of New York called the Bronx, in a little cottage with lilacs and a cherry tree, and a wife dying of tuberculosis. A drunk he was, of course, perhaps a psychotic, but with the madness of prophetic vision. He wrote a story that tells all we need to know about the moment we live in now, the Masque of the Red Death. A mysterious plague, the Red Death, is ravaging the land. Prince Prospero, even the name is perfect. Prince Prospero assembles all the best people in his castle and lays in 2 years' provision of food and drink, and shuts the gates against the outside world, against the virulence of all lesser souls, and commences a masked ball that is to last until the plague has burnt itself out beyond the walls. The party is endless and seamless, and it takes place in 7 grand salons, and in each the revel becomes more intense than in the one before, and the revellers are drawn on toward the 7th room, which is appointed entirely in black. One night, in this last room, appears a guest shrouded in the most clever and most hideously beautiful costume this company of luminous masqueraders has ever seen. This guest is dressed as Death, but so convincingly that Prospero is offended and orders him ejected. But none dares touch him, so that the task is left to the prince himself, and the moment he touches the ghastly shroud, he falls down dead, for the Red Death has entered the house of Prospero. Prospero, my friends. Now, the exquisite part of the story is that somehow the guests have known all along what awaits them in this room, and yet they are drawn irresistibly toward it, because the excitement is so intense, and the pleasure is so unbridled, and the gowns and the food and the drink and the flesh are so sumptuous. And that is all they have. Families, homes, children, the great chain of being, the eternal tide of chromosomes mean nothing to them any longer. They are bound together, and they whirl about one another endlessly, particles in a doomed atom. And what else could the Red Death be but some sort of final stimulation? The ne plus ultra. So Poe was kind enough to write the ending for us more than 100 years ago. Knowing that, who can possibly write all the sunnier passages that should come before? Not I, not I. The sickness, the nausea, the pitiless pain have ceased with the fever that maddened my brain, with the fever called living, that burned in my brain, the fever called living. Those were among the last words he wrote. No, I cannot be the epic poet you deserve. I am too old and far too tired, too weary of the fever called living, and I value your company too much, your company and the whirl, the whirl, the whirl. Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Inez. And with that, the spectral Englishman slowly took his seat. The intruder the Bavardages dreaded most, silence, now commanded the room. The diners looked at one another in embarrassment, 3 kinds of it. They were embarrassed for this old man, who had committed the gaffe of injecting a somber note into an evening at the Bavardages. They were embarrassed because they felt the need to express their cynical superiority to his solemnity, but they didn't know how to go about it. Dared they snigger? After all, he was Lord Buffing of the Nobel shortlist and their host's house guest. And they were embarrassed because there was always the possibility that the old man had said something profound, and they had failed to get it.